This is because households, there's not as large a reduction in household consumption. Households, because they're not being taxed as much, they have more to spend, they spend a larger percentage than they would previously. So you have sort of feedback effects of, if you were, if all of a sudden your income tax was reduced by 2%, there would be some spending effects which would feed through into the economy. And you can see the results for government expenditure there. I'll try and make it a bit closer. Yeah. These are the reductions in emissions for each of the three cases, and the reduction in GDP, the changes in GDP over time between 2004 and 2020. So those are the kind of macro results for the model. The one thing that I would say that's a bit weak about the model is that we fix the capital stock in the first year. There's those short run results. Basically, the difference between the short run and the long run results is that in the first year, the short run, capital stocks are fixed. Capital isn't able you aren't able to update capital. There's a depreciation, but there's no sort of updating of capital stocks. The way that the model is calibrated, I don't think is particularly realistic for some of the energy sectors where capital stocks should perhaps be fixed for a much longer period of time. You may want to, I may have to try to fix them for maybe 20 years or so. It depends, obviously, what electricity generation technology you're talking about. But it means that there's a reduction in emissions through the increase in the tax. There's a reduction in emissions already of just over 27% in 1 year, which seems slightly unrealistic. And then the rest of the model is the path that the economy takes to adjust towards 2020. Obviously, if we introduce the tax, you're not going to see that. You're not going to see a reduction in emissions of that magnitude in one year. It's going to, the path is going to be much more slow. But it's generally just trying to give you an idea of what would happen to the path over time after that, and the effects it may have on GDP. So those are the kind of aggregate results, and then have all of the sectoral results as well. These are the changes in output. So the three sectors at the top are the coal, gas, and oil fuel sectors, which sell a lot of their sell a lot of their products in the model onto coal and gas generation. So as you can see, the output of these sectors reduced considerably, and many other sectors reduce. There's an increase in the output of nuclear, hydro, biomass, wind, but then a reduction in many of the other sectors. So overall, there's tends to be a negative effect on the economy, which is, a sort of decomposition of that reduction, in GDP. We're going to see a reduction in GDP through reduced output in most sectors. And these are the price changes on the top. As you can see, the prices of oil, gas, and coal all increased considerably within the economy in the short run and the long run. The prices of many of the electricity generation technologies all decrease slightly over time. And these are the sort of sectoral emissions effects. So you see a reduction in emissions from coal generation of over 80%, and well, under 80% in the long run. I think that was gas, yeah, and gas reduces by almost 50%. Yep.
These price changes compared to 2004, right?
So it's relative price changes, yeah.
So how the price goes down for some of these?
For some of the sectors. So the relative prices go down. So when there's an increase, so this is really the initial effect is the increase in the prices of, that's what the policy shock is. I'm basically increasing the prices of coal, gas and oil within
And
the
it's
model.
because of carbon tax.
That's the tax initially, yeah.
So I think
And
there
then,
should be no change for other sectors.
but then demand changes for the other sectors. So there's, yeah, so the relative price, so if those prices change, you're going to see people substituting towards the other technologies within the model, which is why you have the increase in output of these sectors. There's an increase in the output of them and a reduction in the prices of those sort of renewable technologies. But there's no kind of technological change within the model, which is something I think that is possible to do in the future at some point. But yeah, I should probably try to wrap up. So yeah, conclusions from the work. There's the electricity, iron, steel, concrete and cement sectors are very important in terms of both output and emissions within the UK economy. It's really important, I think, in terms of the types of macroeconomic modelling to have more detail on the electricity sector. I think it's some sort of a survey, a large-scale UK survey would be very beneficial at some point in the near future. And in terms of the carbon tax, well, it is possible to achieve within this model, certainly, to achieve the carbon budgets in 2020. The effects look like there would be a slight reduction in GDP depending on what you do with the revenues, really. And hopefully in the future I'll try and sort of make the model a bit more robust by changing the way capital is looked at in the model, and also doing some other modelling of relevant UK sort of policy shocks. Anyway, so thank you very much for listening to that. I hope it wasn't too dull.
Thank you. Any more questions?
Do you have any idea how the changes in GDP, such like that you find from this model, compare to other types of economic models? So, for example, energy systems, hybrid energy system macroeconomic models?
I haven't done much. Hopefully I'm going to be doing some comparison of model types, and when I'm there I'm going to try and compare the different types of results you have. The main difference is that a lot of those models, hybrid models and other ones, don't have the level of sectoral breakdown that you have here, which is, I would expect the overall results to be reasonably similar. Well, I guess it depends on what year is the base year or whatever. I would expect the overall results to be a slightly negative effect on GDP, not huge. You're talking about something like 1% roughly. But it's really interesting, I guess, for policymakers to look at the sectoral results and which sectors do you think are going to be more negatively affected and which ones are going to benefit from this tax. Because it's okay to look, there's a lot of focus on the overall aggregate results, but I think it's important to try to break down those results, which is why, well, it's not perfect way of modelling it. I think the multisectoral approach has a lot of benefits to, you can have both kind of aggregate and the breakdown. Yeah.
Sorry. So the carbon tax, did you fix it, or are are you able to calculate endogeneously with the model the carbon tax, or did you fix it for a carbon content?
Yeah, so it was, basically fixed for the carbon content of each fuel. So there was an increase, basically it just increased the price, worked out how much of a price increase there would be for each of those fuels. So I think the increase in the price of coal was roughly about 50% or something, and obviously gas was less and oil was somewhere in between. But yeah, so really just, the model's very good at, if you have changes in prices or relative prices, how that would then feed through into the economy.
So the price that you finally achieved, this 22 pounds per ton, how did you come up?
Oh, so I just it was trial and error to achieve. So I wanted to achieve that 35% reduction, and so it was like, let's try £50. Let's try what was there. You could do it the other way around, but I wanted to see what level of tax would achieve that reduction. You could easily say, if I set a £50 tax, what would be the reduction? And that way you can, if you set lots of different tax rates, you could then calculate a marginal abatement cost curve from the model. So if you just have lots of different tax rates and then plot them against what the level of emissions reduction would be, you can come up with cost curves. Yeah.
I have two questions. The first one is, what is your assumptions on emissions from imports?
So emissions from imports in the model are, so there is a matrix of imports.
So you allocate it.
No, there is. It's not. I don't think in this model it's particularly. I mean, it's detailed. I wasn't too happy with the emissions from imports. I'd like to look at that again in more detail, but they are included within the model.
And the second question is, what's your assumptions on household?
Household emissions?
No, household saving actually. So did you assume all the income that the household receive will be spent on consumption?
No. So there's a savings rate within the model.
So what is the percentage?
I can't remember. I'll find it for you. But it's just the same across all sectors. There is a savings rate which then feeds into up to the level of investment. I'll double. Yep.
And then Hannah, and then I think
Can you tell us a little bit about uncertainty and validity of the CGE models?
So there is no uncertainty. I mean, there's an uncertainty in the results, but there's no uncertainty modelled within it, which was why. I mean, I guess my assumption here was that if you had a really credible, if you had something like the CCC and you had credible policy where there was no real uncertainty for investors, then you wouldn't need a model with uncertainty. I don't think that's going to be true in practice. But in terms of the kind of validity of the model, it's difficult to say. I mean, so I did a lot of other sensitivity analysis around the results, but everything else that I did made it easier to reduce emissions, but had a much more negative effect on the economy. It seemed reasonably robust when I did the sensitivity analysis to what I would have expected, what you would expect to see in practice. That would be
you might have answered this question already, I missed it, but for emission savings and for effects on the economy, you had short run and long run effects.
Yeah.
Did your long run effects, especially on GDP and on emissions and things like that, include basically growth in energy service demands?
No.
Okay, so it was just a snapshot of the economy. So, so for example, if there was 2% growth in different energy service demands, household electricity and transport and things like that into the future, then you might not reach that target.
Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, I think it is possible within these models to then start including things like growth, but you're then assuming exogenously what growth rates are going to be and all that sort of thing, and then you're doing a policy shock against, and so you've got the GDP or whatever increasing, and then you've got the model's just a shock against that and how it goes back to an equilibrium, whereas we're just in the model it's just assuming there is no growth, it's just a flat rate and then your policy shock. Neither of them are really correct, but it simplifies it by just not assuming any growth. It's already in a neoclassical kind of equilibrium.
Is there a way of having the growth to be elastic with price and things like that?
I think it's possible, but I haven't come across. I certainly haven't used anything, but I think I'm not quite sure how growth is modelled in the ones that do use it.
I think it is inhomogeneous because you already have substitutions.
Yeah.
So when you substitute, energy service demand for some sectors actually.
Yeah, you'll see changes in it, but you're not assuming anything's.
You have elasticity of substitution.
But you have a substitution between
So
demands. Yeah, so you'll see an increase in energy services and that sort of thing. But over the period of the model, it's just assumed that you're in equilibrium, there's a shock, and how long does it take for capital and savings to go back to an equilibrium rate, and what's the kind of